Okay. Last few weeks, we've been in a series on faith and vocation, looking at how our discipleship to Jesus extends well beyond Sunday gatherings and small groups and all the way into where we live, work, and play, our neighborhoods, our schools, and our jobs. Closing out this portion of the teaching series this morning will be Phil Miller, and I know you'll be blessed. And so I'm going to read the scripture today, and it's just one verse. It can be found in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, and you can follow along with me. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your reasonable act of worship or service. This is the word of the Lord.
I've had a lot of experiences in work. In fact, I learned how to work from my father, Vernon Dallas Miller. And the old phrase, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, is certainly true in my case. Because my dad has not just had one career, he's had several. So my dad has been a pastor. He was a pastor when I was born. He's been a curriculum editor. He's been a carpenter. While he was in college, he built a home to pay for his college. He has owned a church building firm. He has been a board member on nonprofit boards of many different kinds, particularly Christian ministries like Awana. So I grew up with a workaholic father. Oh, did I say that? Yes, we all have to admit it in the Miller family. We love to work. And if I was sent down to the garden down the street in a Chicago suburb, yes, we had a garden at somebody else's house, and if I was sent down there to hoe the beans, believe me, I didn't take a drink with me because we were supposed to work. And that was very, very good. Now, in light of the verse that we read this morning, if you guys can put that up there again, the first slide with the verse, please. It's not that I couldn't decide how to translate the words of that verse. It's that that word that is at the end of Romans 12:1 could be translated either way. It could be translated as worship, which is the cult-like and cultus of the Old Testament, because Paul uses it that way in the book of Romans in chapter 9. So it could be talking about the activity that you do when you're going about accomplishing this relationship, this religion with God, or it could be translated as the word service, which is just the common word, in a sense, for someone dedicated to their master who was a servant who did their bidding. And so in order to help us see this sacredness of work, as Matt taught us last week, and this vocation that we have been designed to fulfill, as Brad taught us, and this sense of work as an understanding of how we were made in the image of God, which Neil taught us, we need to take a very practical look at how these are not only woven together, but without becoming workaholics, to realize we were made for work. And that work, in one sense, is the most practical thing you do every day as worship to God. So, instead of preaching the theology behind it, I'd like to talk about the practice of it. So here we are. How can we do our work as worship? That's the question that we have. And even after the fine 3 sermons that we've had so far, we may still have that question like, well, how am I supposed to live that? So based on my history and lots of years of experience, I guess, let's talk about that. How do you do that? what do you do? And maybe you've never thought of your work as worship. And as we will see today in some very practical ways, the way we reflect God and the way we model God in the way we work is in fact itself worship. I've defined work as deliberate activity using skills for goals. We can all do that whether we're paid or not paid. We are active with what we have been made, and we are using the skills that we have for the goals that we want to meet. Worship needs to be a proper response to the value and importance of God. So if I properly value and respond to God for who He really is, the maker of all, the creator of all, the one who I answer to for all, how do these two come together and not just kind of overlap, but are together, inseparable in the way I live? For we all know very clearly that this day of worship, this you're not at work right now, you're sitting here, this day is supposed to determine what you do in all the other 6. That's the pattern of God Himself. In 6 days He created everything, and on the 7th day He rested. So He gives us this Sabbath discipline. If you don't know about that, go to Practicing the Practices, look it up, you'll get some great material. We are now people who have been dedicated to the response to God that we were made to have, and we can work this out through work. So how do we do this? I've chosen today to give you some points and to not necessarily put a bunch of verses in front of you. What I want to do is make some points today that you can think about and consider. And based on the verses I'm about to read and to comment on, I want you to see how each of these things that I tell you today are something that you can do and need to do Monday through Saturday on all those 6 days of the week. Stay active and creative to be productive. We are made in the image of God, and we have seen in these past couple of weeks how our value is based on God's work of making us in His image, and our value is not based on the functional value we give to other people or to ourselves by work. We never create anything because we were created. So even if we're using our active bodies and minds, and we're being creative and productive, we're simply displaying the God who made us. We're not defining ourselves. We're not placing a particular value on ourselves alone. We are saying God is a person who in the Trinity decided to make man in our image, He said. So the most common fact about God is that He works in order to work out our lives. Now, that's exactly how we're supposed to live every day, exactly like God. That's why in the book of Proverbs, you will find many, many verses about don't be a sluggard. Don't waste your whole night on screen time. Well, that's not in Proverbs, but you know what I mean. We say to ourselves, well, I don't really have to do anything today. I don't feel, I just don't feel like doing my job today. Now, we all have emotions and reactions, and we'll get to some of that in this sermon today, but right off the bat, we have to know from the time we are a child that God is always at work, and without us becoming somehow overly indulgent or involved in work, we were made to work. I know this is true when it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, so God created man in His image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. He did His work. He used his skill. He produced something out of nothing. Now, since we can't do that, we can at least image God by the way we'd go about it. Genesis 2, verse 15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." See, human beings were created to work in the created reality to image or display or show what God is like. And when we're at work, people can see what God is as a person. He is productive. He's creative. He makes things beautiful and attractive. And we follow suit. So it comes from the very definition of who made us for what we need to do to make something in the world. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12 says this: "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life," he's talking about the 6 days a week, "so your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody." Paul is not simply telling these people, now get to work because you're just a lazy bum if you don't. That's not what he's saying. He's saying because God has created you as a person and He has included you in His people, He does not want you to live in such a way that you would make other people have to take care of you instead of using your God-given life to work and to take care of yourself and others. Because when we are lazy, we are not living out a godly life. Because God is never lazy. Sluggards, people who, as the book of Proverbs says, are hinged to the bed. Yeah, it's a phrase in Proverbs, right? You're hinged to the bed. I'll try it. Back to bed. The reason that there are so many prohibitions in the wisdom literature about it is because it doesn't display God. Just by our existence as to whether we're lazy or hardworking, we show that we worship God. If we rightly respect God, if we want to honor Him and value Him above all others, including ourselves, then we will work. When I grew up in a Chicago suburb, the suburb of Glen Ellen, right next to Wheaton, we had a lot of family chores. Every Saturday morning from when I was a little kid, we cleaned our room by ourselves. And we did everything, and we ate our breakfast, and we didn't watch cartoons. Saturday night, we shined our shoes and took a bath and laid our clothes out for Sunday morning the next day. I know it's been a lot of years since then, right? But the 1960s were very fun. My dad was who grew up as a farmer in southern Illinois. So we just had a garden. My older brother and I both had paper routes from the time I was in 4th grade. And so every morning we got up at 5 a.m. when our mom woke us up, and we took the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times to deliver them to people's houses. And sometimes those people were elderly. So my dad concocted a scheme to go down to one of the houses and say, "Hey, I noticed you have an extra lot. My son delivers a paper to you. If we mowed your grass for free, could we use your extra lot for a garden?" Yeah, that's where the beans were that I would hoe. So I just grew up thinking, you work. So by the time I was a junior in high school, I had a part-time job, 4 hours a night, and I cleaned a 3-story office building all by myself. I'm not saying that to impress you. I'm saying we worked. We needed to work. I needed the money to work. I saved up enough when I was a paper boy to actually pay $1,000 for college when I went to college. Now, I didn't think this up myself. Obviously, my parents trained me that way. And yes, it was a very work-oriented family. But we learned to work. Don't ever make the mistake to think that somehow the kids are always supposed to get everything done for them. That's not really training them in godliness and Christ-likeness. So, let's go on to another point. Did I miss one? Sorry, go back one. One more. There you go. Thank you. Be productive to benefit people. Exodus 20, verse 9 says this: 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Labor and work was necessary for the culture and society to exist and prosper. It was not optional, it was essential. That's why Paul says in one place, in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, anyone does not provide for his relatives and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, he's not simply saying, you ought to be kind to the people that are your family. What he's saying is, God would never be the kind of person who doesn't take care of his kids and his relatives. This is worship in and of itself, is it not? That's why he says, if we don't provide for the people we're supposed to care for, we are denying the faith. That sounds kind of harsh. Well, they're just like, no, there's no excuse. Paul is saying there's an immediate connection between you work and provide for others so that you live out the faith instead of denying the very faith in the person of God, who would never treat someone like that, especially someone of his own family. That would not be the kind of way that the world needs to see Christians living. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, Paul says these words: he who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with his own hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. Notice what Paul is saying. He is saying that work is not simply to provide for ourselves. Work isn't primarily, I've got a good job, I can get some income, and I can take care of my immediate family. I'm good. No, that's not godliness. That's not the worship of the true God. Because the reason God works is so everybody else can benefit from his work. So the scope of our work and its benefits shows the way we worship the true God. So if you're a thief, if you're lazy and you just want to live off other people, then turn that around. Don't simply get a haircut and get a real job. That was a song they used to play when I went roller skating with my daughter when she was a little kid. But instead, work so you can give away. Work enables us to no longer be a thief, but instead to share. The goal of work is sharing. My father's father, Homer Dallas Miller, in southern Illinois, in a little town of McClure, right across the Mississippi River from a town in Missouri, way down southern Illinois, almost to Cairo, And they were on a little farm. It was on bottomland. It was just off of the levee from the Mississippi River. And if the Mississippi ever came over that levee and flooded the land, my grandpa's farm was totally underwater. So my grandma and grandpa said to the rest of their family, especially during the really lean times of the 30s and 40s, anybody who needs work or needs a place to stay, we don't have much, but we've got some huts on the property, and if you need to come live here and work for us so you can eat, you can come. My Grandpa Miller was a person who decided his town didn't have a church. So he and his sons literally dug a hole in the ground and built a church. My grandpa never went to Bible school or anything, but he studied the scriptures, and so there's a little white church in the town of McClure because my grandpa and his family put it there. It's still there today. And he knew that his neighbors really needed electricity out in the hills, and so when electricity was going to be brought into the area, he decided he would be the one who went out there and asked people if they were willing to sign up so that the government would bring electricity out to their farms. And my grandpa decided that since he was in the town of McClure and nobody else seemed to care about it, he would start a school board so that the school board would actually have a decent school, so when all the kids went to school, they could graduate with a degree that was worth something. And so all kinds of things exist in McClure, Illinois, because my grandpa decided work is for sharing. Because he worships a God who literally worked himself to death and back to life for him to have a life. Now that's worship. Now, obviously my Grandpa Miller was not he wasn't. He was not a proud man who went around trying to have power around the area. Towards the end of his life, he drove a Tom's snack food truck. But he was still serving God and people. It does not matter what work we have as long as the work we have is our way of not only having provision for our family, but sharing with the world that we touch. That's worship. Next, bring God's will into the world by your work. This is exactly what Jesus did, and I can prove it by the verse in John. My food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. This was where the disciples had gone to get something for him to eat when he was talking to the woman at the well. And when they came back, he said, I'm not hungry anymore. And they said to themselves, where did he find some food? And so Jesus, to show how life really is worship that results in work, said, my food is not the sub sandwich you just brought back to me. My food is doing the will of my Father and making sure it gets done. Because that's why I'm here in this world. And that's true about us as well. See how practical worship is in our everyday life? Jesus was saying the fulfillment of his inner person was not about good food. He loved good food. He had lots of party food. He shared with people, they shared with him, the relationships, but his existence and his fulfillment internally, personally, was not based on what he could consume. It was based on what he could complete to please his Father and give life to the woman at the well. That's worship, the way Jesus lived. So recently I've had the opportunity to take on a whole new job that I've never done before in my life. I've never had one course on teaching, and I'm a substitute at CAK, a private Christian school in the area. Fifth grade, fourth grade, first grade. I got to teach first graders how to read time on the face of a clock. Eighth grade, all over the map. But you know what? I found out, especially when you're a grandpa like I am, you just go in there and connect with the kids and love them and figure out what the teacher told you to do on the piece of paper. And then you say, okay, let's do this together. So all I get paid to do is to help them learn, right? Work is not about, did I do a good job? Well, that's a good question. I grant you, it's a good question, but we've already covered that in the laziness and the work like God part, right? So when we look at the goal, and when we look at the way Jesus lived, and when we look at the scriptures, the way it's said, we're not dependent on anybody because we're helping them. That's what work is supposed to be about. That's the goal, because we worship a God who is loving and holy for our sake. We do not exist in a world that is created by anybody else, and therefore everything in our world is displaying God. Most of all, those of us as persons who occupy this earth, who are made in the image of God. Well, I had a career as a pastor, sure. But that was just one phase of working to help people. We're all working to help somebody. No matter what our age, no matter what our job, no matter what our role. Because in every job, we are to please God more than anyone else in your job. We've got to have a worshipful mindset that says, no matter what I'm doing this to reflect and to revere God. Therefore, Jesus himself is our real boss. Even our boss has a boss that's named Jesus. That's specifically what the scripture says, right? Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 through 9. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like servants of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. So we don't ever work our job with some sort of way of trying to trick people into thinking we're doing more than we really are. Or that somehow we fulfilled the job description, but we really didn't give it our best effort. Or that somehow, well, since they don't have to work hard, I don't have to work hard. None of that is worship of God. What is worship of God is to say, I'm accountable to God through Jesus Christ. So, Paul says in Ephesians 6, serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. I can imagine if I were a slave back then, I might be tempted to sit in my room and think, I don't want to be a slave. I don't want to be treated like a slave. I'm not doing my work today. They can't treat me like that. Now, I'm not saying that Paul is giving permission for people to be mistreated in their work. But we have a lot of attitude issues in our culture that we need to get rid of because it's between us and Jesus when we go to our job. And masters, Treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Sometimes when I substitute, particularly in the middle school grades, students accuse me of treating them differently than someone else. Can I go to the restroom? Well, you have to wait a minute. Well, you told that kid he could go. Which is why I'm telling you to wait until they get back. So we are worshipers who respond with godly attitudes, with godly actions, with godly deeds, even if it gets really, really, really tough. 1 Peter 4:19 says, "So then those who suffer according to God's will," certainly working would be God's will, "should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good." When I was in seminary, way back in the late 70s, early 80s, I got a job part-time as a janitor at a grade school in the area of Grand Rapids where I was going to school. During the summertime, they put everybody from all the buildings of the whole school district together, and then you clean one building at a time. And during the summertime, the people with the most seniority, particularly, are given their choice, what they do or don't want to do. And also during the summer, based on how many years you've worked as a janitor in the East Grand Rapids school system, you are given a bonus check. Well, one of the gentlemen who decided that summer he was not going to work at all. So every time he went to another building, he simply found a room, locked himself in that room, and fell asleep every day. And he got the biggest check bonus that summer. Now, the rest of the guys, we all had to make a choice. I'll leave it to your imagination to know what kind of choices they made, all the way from reporting him to Augie, our boss, or breaking into the room and waking him up by tickling his nose with a feather. But we all had to make a choice. And here I was, this seminary student, right? So everybody's watching me like, what am I going to do? And I just worked. I just worked. And at the end of the summer, they're like, wow, you really work. And I'm like, well, that's what we're here to do, right? Work. They actually thought it was something different because I was someone claiming to want to follow God and just did his job. It was a union shop, and their mentality was, I'll get away with anything I can and still get paid like everybody else. I couldn't approach it with that attitude. And so, based on my reputation, my brother-in-law decided to come to the same school. I went to Augie, the boss, and I said, hey, my brother-in-law Larry would like a job. And he said, he's hired. I don't even have to talk to him. Yeah. And he got a full-time job as he worked through seminary. Just because I did my job. Finally, our business plans are a great way to practice trust in God. And this one sounds easy, but it's not. James 4:13 through 17. Now listen, you who say, hey, today or tomorrow, we'll go to this city or that city. We'll spend a year. We're going to carry on business. We're going to make money. Show me the money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, I will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast and brag, all such boasting is evil. So what is he telling us? Don't make plans? No, he's not telling us that. Is he saying don't plan ahead? No, he's not saying that. He's really saying every work decision you make is an act of worship. Because every work decision and plan you make is a reflection of what you think of your God. If you show me your plans, I can tell you what you think about God. That's what he's saying. How do we work with patience? How do we work with hope and not self-reliance? You see, we as humans who have been separated from God and turned our own way, we're disoriented when it comes to work, and we think we can use our work life to make our life work. It doesn't, pardon the saying, work that way. God is the one who is over all things. And as he exercises his will in the world and we line up with God's purposes, he has work for us to do. But it is never self-oriented planning. It is always trusting. It is always relying on God. It is always patient. It's like a farmer. If you want to learn this in your work life, work in nature, no matter what your job is. Yeah, see, some of you are thinking, I don't do that. Yeah, because it's hard. Because you can't force it to do anything. Right? We moved into the house that we moved into almost 8 years ago, and there was this woods on the back of the hill, and so at some point, life being what it was, I decided, I'm going to clean that place up. We're going to make it into something, right? And I'll tell you, the greatest lesson I've learned in the last 5 years is patience. I planted tomatoes last week. I got to be patient. Right? It's when we work directly with what God has created, it makes us tone down our creative desire to do something on our own. And it makes us cooperate with our Maker so that we can actually tend. This is what Adam and Eve were given to do, wasn't it? Not because everybody has to be a farmer, but the way we work in a God-created world is we work with God and God's plans and God's timing and not based on ourselves. That's why it's really not a good thing if we are always in a controlled environment, especially one at the push of a button. It makes us think that life is in our control. And I'm sure people who have shades that go up and down with a remote are very comfortable. More power to them. But that's not real life. Real life is, how did God make the world, and how are you going to work with the world that God made without trying to play God? That's the question. Proverbs 30, verse 7 says this. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go to this or that city. Oh, I'm sorry, I already read that. Proverbs 30. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and dishonor the name of my God. Jesus said, pray this way. Give us this day our daily bread. And somehow, with our planners and our computers and all our programs, we think we can get around that, and we cannot. My wife and I have been through an experience in this last decade of our life unlike anything we could have ever imagined. And we have had many years at a time thinking, when I was sick and couldn't work, we didn't plan on Linda being the only wage earner. Well, we didn't plan life when I couldn't work. Wait a minute, I wasn't ready to retire. I didn't plan on this timing. And yet, this has put us in touch with the reality of work as worship. God loves us. He will take care of us. He's always at work. He will always provide. He is not lazy. He is trustworthy. And I guarantee you, if you work with a God like that and you work in a way that images that kind of God, you will live a life where God provides and you can benefit others. I didn't promise a really huge bank account or all your savings and retirement goals matched, but I do promise you this. You will be able to fulfill the wisdom of the Scripture. Proverbs 23:4 says this: do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. But I got to work hard. I got to get 3 jobs. Maybe you will. But never with the attitude, I'm going to make my life work by my work. No. We go into our responsibilities, our careers, our jobs, with all these things we've talked about today based on one thing: God. Who is God? How do I respond to Him? That kind of worship service is the way we can make our work, practically speaking, fulfill the very things we've been taught for the past 3 weeks. God bless His word today.